Yeah, Bill and Candace, and before getting to that bit, mentioning the protest starting at Monroe Park, it already has moved on from there. We're going to walk up here. We are at Franklin and one block east, Franklin and Henry, I believe, one block east of Monroe Park, where about 30 minutes ago, the crowd of at least over 1,000 left Monroe Park heading east down Franklin. And, since then there has been a steady trickle of people heading back towards where the majority of the crowd has been heading down, as the majority of the group was marching down, chanting things like Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. Now, of course, earlier today there was the call to action event involving many faith leaders, city leaders, including the mayor, LeVar Stoney. We had Delegate Dolores McQuinn and the leader of the Richmond NAACP, and among other things, they were condemning the recent deaths of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, of Ahmaud Arbery, and also condemning systemic racism that has allowed to fester and saying it needs to be torn down. One minister saying that enough is enough and they need to tear it down, and they also need to declare war on bad policing. Now, they also talked about some of the protests that have been happening in this city and condemning the violence that's happened later at night, drowning out the message of the more peaceful protests, and other focusing on Richmond specifically and calling for accountability of the Richmond Police Department. A lot of those calls actually coming from people in the crowd of today's event and criticizing police for how they have responded to the last 3 nights, and including one man who gave an impromptu speech from the crowd after the official event was over, even as the organizers took away the microphone. Now, first, you're going to hear from Delegate Dolores McQuinn about calling out the silence of leaders that she says has allowed systemic racism, and followed by the man who gave that speech afterwards, Alan Charles Chipman, about his desire to see the creation of an independent civilian review board over police.
The authorities that have not been interested in helping to fix an America that created these racially charged environments have neglected us all. For too long, generations of wealthy and influential have been complicit in tolerating democracy for some and dismissing democracy for others. Why? Because they were not the ones being oppressed and mistreated.
What you see happening right now is that the police, because the city is on fire, they're calling for a civilian review board that would be watched over by the police. We need independent citizen review board with subpoena power that will be able to police the police. The police do not police themselves. We know this around the country. We see what's going on around the country. It is also true in Richmond.
Now, the board that Chipman referring to stems back to the 2018 killing of Marcus David Peters, a school teacher, by a Richmond police officer. Both individuals involved were black. The Richmond Commonwealth's attorney investigated and ruled it was a justifiable homicide, but his family said that he was suffering a mental health emergency, and one of the calls from this was for the creation of something called the Marcus Alert, which would send mental health professionals to situations where someone is having a mental health crisis rather than a police officer. And when he spoke today, Mayor LeVar Stoney did touch on those two things, and he said that they have to explore civilian review boards and that they have to make the Marcus Alert happen in the city. And again, with the protests that had started at Monroe Park, now moving its way down Franklin Street east towards downtown. At least 1,000 was the primary current, as we've been saying, dozens just streaming down after them as well. Working for you in Richmond, Cameron Thompson, CBS 6 News.